think, as they said, it's a gesture of goodwill in an attempt to, maybe stave off the imminent disaster it faces with Israel going into Gaza and rooting it out and destroying it. And one way of holding that off would be to, organize a trickle release of these hostages a couple at a time, and that would stave things off while they try to work out a way of defending themselves.
So why did Hamas release those two US passport holders? The Qatar government, I understand, played a role.
Yes, Qatar's been playing is the general negotiator with Hamas. It's home to the Hamas political leadership in rather the same way it was to the Taliban leadership at one stage. Qatar is a American ally. It's home to Central Command, but it has a sort of Islamist sort of politics under the control of the ruling royal family. So it's seen as a sort of suitable mediator, and it says that it is trying to hopefully bring de-escalation of the whole crisis, but it's doing that through the medium of the why Hamas did it. I think, as they said, it's a gesture of goodwill in an attempt to, maybe stave off the imminent disaster it faces with Israel going into Gaza and rooting it out and destroying it. And one way of holding that off would be to, organize a trickle release of these hostages a couple at a time, and that would stave things off while they try to work out a way of defending themselves.
Yeah, so we might expect a trickle release of hostages. That is one option. Hamas also said that they released these two women, both passport holders, mum and daughter, because they want to prove Joe Biden wrong. What do you make of their comments?
Yeah, I mean, I think I was baffled by that, as probably a lot of people were. I mean, what particular disproof that is? I suppose, proving that they're still alive is one thing, and that they haven't been, tortured and worse. But yeah, no, that was not really quite clear what that meant.
Yeah, certainly. And let's talk about what this means for the other hostages, how much we know so far. You've talked about potentially a trickle release of hostages. What are the other options here? So this is the way that Hamas can control, I guess, what's happening on the ground, all the while Israel threatening a ground invasion into Gaza.
I think that's exactly it. It's a very good question, and I kind of when this all started, people were saying that Israel was going in straight away into Gaza, and I said I didn't think that was likely. I thought there would be a couple of weeks before Israel launched the ground invasion. So I was kind of expecting it today, if you like. No sign of it. So no one's quite clear what's going through Benjamin Netanyahu's head, who's the Israeli prime minister. I suspect he won't be totally swayed by this Hamas tactic, but I think that is Hamas's tactic.
Let's talk about what's happening on the ground at the Rafah crossing, the border from Egypt into Gaza. Those aid trucks still stymied. I was looking at pictures last night of 50 or so trucks waiting at that border, and this justification by Egypt, from Egypt, that the road needs repairing. I mean, it sort of baffled me to a certain extent that is still the case, some 10 days after really calls started to increase for aid to go into Gaza. What do you understand is the situation?
To be clear, I mean, Egypt is not holding up the aid. Israel has been holding up the aid by not giving it guarantees of security. Yes, so the official explanation is that the road across that border, which was bombed by the Israelis, needs to be repaired and hasn't quite finished being repaired yet. I believe there are certain other issues going on about inspecting those the contents of those convoys, which obviously Israel is keen should not contain anything that can be used by Hamas.
Yeah, Israel insists that the trucks only carry food, water and medicine. How do officials in Gaza, how do aid workers there ensure that none of it reaches Hamas? That is the big concern.
Well, that's why I suspect you haven't seen fuel on there. I mean, the hospitals in Gaza badly need fuel to run their generators. The strip doesn't have any power at the moment. Its own one power station is no longer functioning because it's run out of fuel, and Israel isn't providing any. So that's why you don't see fuel on there. I mean, food and water perhaps it shouldn't be so controversial.
No, but I guess it's just how on the ground they can offer the ultimate assurance that it's not going to end in the hands of Hamas. Surely that is an impossible assurance to make, is it? Or will this be solely coordinated by aid workers who will be protected in that work in terms of ensuring the aid gets to those who need it most?
Yeah, I mean, everyone has to eat, whatever whether they're militants or civilians. I think they're more concerned about what might be hidden in it, I guess.
Understood.
Or smuggled in with it.
And we've got no sense, have we still, over when this crossing will be open? Rishi Sunak saying yesterday that it will happen imminently. Antonio Guterres, the UN chief, saying it'll open in the next day or so. I mean, it feels like Groundhog Day a little bit. It must be so incredibly frustrating for aid workers there, Richard.
Yeah, that's correct. President Biden, we expected it to start yesterday. It didn't. President Biden said it would happen last night said it would happen between in 24 to 48 hours. Those talks are still going on, clearly.
And I wonder whether this starts to look embarrassing for world leaders and, senior officials who are, saying that it'll open imminently. There's only so long that we can carry on hearing that. And meanwhile, Joe Biden, who is a power player in this, we know that, starts to look a little smaller, doesn't he?
I mean, I think a lot of it does depend on your perspective on the whole conflict. I think for a lot of Palestinians and pro-Palestinians, the world looks, as if it's lost control of the situation already.
Yeah, there've been. We are now 2 weeks on exactly from that horrific attack on Israel, and I know that in Tel Aviv, where you are, and around Israel, Richard, there have been tributes. I saw a really kind of striking one yesterday in the Tel Aviv Museum Plaza. Of course, Friday night is Shabbat dinner night, and there was a whole table there with 200 empty chairs to signify those 200 hostages. That was laid out across the plaza. What else have you been seeing there as Israel, desperately tries to keep this front and centre of everyone's minds?
Well, as always, there's a slight difference between how countries project themselves inwards and how they project themselves outwards. So yes, there's a very powerful mood of solidarity amongst ordinary Israelis who've come together and put their very considerable political differences aside. And these, as you say, moving tributes are part of that. They're also, of course, still, recovering, telling each other the stories, the personal stories of what happened on that day 2 weeks ago. I spoke to an incredible guy yesterday who'd jumped on top of a hand grenade that was thrown into the shelter where he was sheltering. He was suffering from cancer, so he said, "Well, why hesitate?" And he jumped on this hand grenade and survived. He's now, well enough to start telling that particular story. And these, of course, are very powerful stories to tell the outside world that Israel is, coming through this and determined to hit back after what happened to it.
There is a peace summit due today in Egypt. The question's over whether Israel will be represented at all. Do we know anything more about that? James Cleverly, our Foreign Secretary, is on the guest list, but details are still sketchy so far, Richard.
Yeah, I think a lot depends on whether James Cleverly, Rishi Sunak, Joe Biden on his trip to the Middle East got what they were being told by Arab states about how they saw this playing out in the next few weeks and indeed thereafter, what their plan for resolving this, not the immediate situation, but the broader situation of the Israel-Palestinian conflict was. what the point is in having a summit in the middle of all this. As I say, I think there are people who want to, hold Israel off invading now because they fear what will happen afterwards, that it might escalate across the region. So I think people are weighing up that issue, and thinking maybe it's worth getting together to thrash out ideas at least, and who knows what might materialize.
Well, look, Richard, thank you so much for letting us speak to you again. Do take care. Richard Spencer there, Times correspondent based in Tel Aviv at the moment. Thanks, Richard.